Bom dia. Welcome back.
Bom dia. Another beautiful morning in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. It's Monday morning and I have the apartment all to myself. Tanya has gone home and she won't be back until Christmas. That's a month from now. And Eliomar is at work, of course. So I am enjoying my freedom. Out and about. Talk today about how I got interested in Latin America in general and Brazil in particular. Back in the day, 30 years, 40 years ago, my primary focus of interest was India and the Indian subcontinent. And then, I believe it was 1986, I made my first trip to Latin America. It was to Mexico. Prior to that, I really wasn't interested in Mexico. I had all sorts of stupid, ignorant, stereotype ideas about it. But I loved it on my first visit back in 1986. And then went back for a second visit, more seriously, in 1989. And really fell in love with Mexico. And also in my job, at that time I was director of a social service program in San Francisco, serving low-income and homeless families, and our client population had changed from largely Southeast Asian to largely Spanish-speaking Latin American. So I felt like it was really time for me to start learning Spanish, both for personal and professional reasons. So when I got back from my second trip to Mexico in '89, I dedicated myself to learning Spanish. And every day I studied Spanish by myself, and then I went out and found opportunities to speak it in the community. You know, I lived in California, so a large Spanish-speaking population to practice with. And within a year, I was at an advanced level. And I've said this before and I will say it again. Love that church too. Spanish is not a difficult language to learn. It's for English speakers, it's a relatively easy language to learn. And I was advanced within a year with a lot of practice, a lot of dedication, but in a year I was advanced, and within a few years I became fluent. Anyway, I kept going down to Mexico like every 3 months. Even though I was working full-time, I'd go down for sometimes as little as a 3-day weekend, fly to Mexico City. And then in 1993 I quit my job and moved to Mexico and got a job first as an English teacher and then as the director of an English language school in Mexico City and later in the state of Veracruz. And so the 90s were my Mexico decade and my Spanish language decade. And then I also became more and more curious about the rest of Latin America, and started moving way south, first to Guatemala, and then I worked my way down Central America, and then, let's see, I made my first trip to South America, I believe it was in '93. First country was Ecuador, and then by the turn of the century, I had pretty much had been to all of the Spanish-speaking countries, not all, but almost all of the Spanish-speaking countries in Spanish-speaking Latin America. And I'd been to Spain by that time several times too. And I was totally absorbed by Spanish. I lived, breathed, and ate Spanish. And I was fluent to the point where at work, my Spanish-speaking families and clients, before they actually met me and saw me, and I would talk to them on the phone, they would assume I was a native speaker. That's how good my Spanish was. And they'd be surprised to see that I was a gringo. And so it was late '99, and I had been to almost all the countries And one day I was walking down the street in San Francisco and I met a Brazilian. And I had never been on to Brazil before. I'd had no exposure to Portuguese. Didn't even know what Portuguese sounded like. That's how little I knew about the language. He invited me to come stay with him in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I thought to him, well, you know what? I've been almost everywhere else. It's time to discover Brazil. And I bought a Teach Yourself Portuguese book. You know, I thought this is going to be easy. The language looks so similar to Spanish on the written page. Little did I know, it looks easy on paper, but it sounds completely different. But anyway, I spent a few weeks teaching myself basic Portuguese, and then I went for a 2-week visit to Brazil. And something clicked. And that was in late '99, and here I am in late 2025. And I'm here, and I'm a permanent legal resident of Brazil, and I'm just a few months away from applying for citizenship here in Brazil. Do I still speak Spanish? Yes. That's ingrained in my memory banks. I still consider myself fluent in Spanish, although my spoken Spanish is a little bit rusty now. I can still speak Spanish, but sometimes it's inflected a little bit with Brazilian Portuguese. But you know, all I have to do is just concentrate, and then I can wash the Portuguese quickly out of my Spanish. Anyway, in those early years, the first 2 years I lived in Sao Paulo, the second year in Rio de Janeiro, and the third year I discovered Salvador, and here I still am. I also met, in those early years, in Salvador, the Andrade family, and I am now an Andrade. I got married to an Andrade, and formed and developed, and now have a Brazilian family here. I mentioned before, I'm separated now from my spouse, but still very much part of the family. Life and my future are right here in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. I've noticed that I've walked up into the Pelourinho district, Salvador's historic district, where the city of Salvador was founded back in the year 1549. And going to take a little walk in the Pelourinho. And I mentioned a little earlier that I consider Spanish to be a fairly easy language for English speakers to learn. Portuguese, on the other hand, is a bit more difficult. The two languages are cousins, and they share a lot of similarities, but Portuguese is a bit harder. The sound system is much more complex. The grammar is a little bit more complex, but it's basically the pronunciation. Learning how to understand spoken Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese, that makes it more difficult than Spanish. But not impossible by any means, of course. And it's an absolutely gorgeous language. It's a sexy language. It's a very rich language. I find Portuguese a joy to speak, and Spanish also, but Portuguese has so much texture and richness to it, and it has so many unusual, unexpected sounds. Many people, including myself, when I first started hearing Portuguese, I thought it sounded a lot like Russian. It's got a lot of harsh, what sound like harsh sounds to it that don't exist in Spanish, which is much softer. And I called it a mix of Spanish, Russian, spoken with a Brooklyn accent. Look, there's a carousel here in the Plaza de Sé. I guess getting ready for Christmas. Another issue when I first started learning Portuguese is the difference between Portuguese and Spanish was, as a resident of California, there were multiple opportunities in the course of a day to speak Spanish. There are so many Spanish speakers in California and in other states. At work, in my neighborhood, I lived in the Latino district, at the local bar, restaurants, everywhere. I could go the whole day speaking Spanish, whereas, you know, it's not so easy to find opportunities to speak and practice Portuguese. There are larger Brazilian Portuguese communities, I believe, in the Boston area, in New England, and in Miami, of course, but not so much in California. Why New England? Because I believe there was a large migration of people from what was once a Portuguese colony, now an African country called Cabo Verde, settled in the New England, Boston area, and that they were followed by Brazilians. And that's why New England, because this climate surely wasn't something that drew them. Whereas in Miami, the climate, of course, must seem much more hospitable to Brazilians with its semi-tropical climate. This is a nice day to come up into the Pelourinho. It's a Monday morning. It's off season before the holidays. There are very few tourists or people in general. Very nice. This is the way I like it. If I've ever mentioned this before, but I don't like tourists. Said the tourist. Well, I don't consider myself a tourist here in Salvador. I'm a resident, but of course I've traveled to lots of places in the world where, you know, as much as you want to label yourself a traveler rather than a tourist, come on, the locals take one look at you and they know you're a tourist. But I don't like tourists. Well, let me say it correctly. I don't like to be around tourists, or I don't like places that attract a lot of tourists, which is why I can't stand places like Cancun. I can't stand Las Vegas. Those are just two examples. Puerto Vallarta, I'm not a fan of. I like places that are much more authentic and where I'm not feel like I'm swarmed by Carnival Cruise day trippers. Call me a snob. One of Salvador's oldest and most famous churches, I believe it's the Igreja de São Francisco. Look at the intricate facade on it. And I believe the interior is covered in millions and millions of dollars worth of gold. The door is covered in fitas de bonfim. I feel like I almost have the Pelourinho to myself this morning. Love walking these streets. I love these little multicolored houses. I fantasize about living in one sometimes. I like the quiet, empty side streets where there are no or almost no people walking. Makes you feel like I have the Pelourinho all to myself, especially on a day like today. I'm going to end this episode here. I'm trying to keep my episodes to around 11 or 12 minutes long. That has been shown to be the ideal attention span of YouTube videos. So, as always, I want to say to you, beijo, ciao.